On the 26th of July, 1909, in the harbour at Durban, a man refused to get back on his ship. His name was Claude Sawyer. He was an engineer, a passenger aboard the liner Waratah, bound from Australia to London by way of the Cape. He had boarded her in Adelaide, and somewhere in the long roll of the Indian Ocean, he had made up his mind that he would not stay aboard. Later, under oath, he would be careful about how he said it. He told the Board of Trade Inquiry that the ship's motion troubled him, that she rolled slowly and heavily and did not always come back the way a ship should, that she seemed to lie over and hang there a beat too long before she righted. He said he had felt uneasy. He said he had dreamed badly. He asked to be believed on the first point and not pressed too hard on the second. At Durban, he went ashore with his luggage. He paid to have his passage refunded. He stood on the quay and watched the Waratah take on cargo and coal for the run down to Cape Town. That was the last time he saw her. It was very nearly the last time anyone did. 211 people sailed south from Durban on the Waratah. Not one of them was ever seen again. No wreck was found. No lifeboat came ashore. No body was ever recovered and confirmed as hers. For more than 100 years, men have gone looking, and the sea has kept its silence. This is the question the record leaves open: where she went and why. The Waratah was almost new. She had been built on the Clyde at the yard of Barclay Curle and Company in Glasgow and launched in the autumn of 1908. She was a large ship for her trade, around 465 feet long, some 10,000 tons, and she belonged to the Blue Anchor Line, the firm of Wilhelm Lund and Sons, which ran emigrants and cargo out to Australia and brought wool and passengers home. She was built for that specific run. Out to Australia, crowded with emigrants in third class, home again with the holds full of frozen meat and wool and lead concentrate, and a smaller number of first-class passengers in some comfort. The photographs that survive of her interiors show a genuinely handsome ship. A first-class music room, a smoking room, a promenade under glass, cabins in oak and brass. The press liked to call her the new liner of the southern route, a ship to be proud of. She had made one full round voyage before this one, out and back without serious incident. She was, by every ordinary measure, a modern, well-found vessel in the hands of an experienced company. She had two features worth holding in your mind because the inquiry would return to both. The first, she carried no wireless. In 1909, wireless telegraphy at sea was new and far from universal. Many ships had it, many did not. The Waratah did not. Once she was over the horizon and out of sight of land or another vessel, she could not call for help, and no one ashore could call to her. When she was gone, she was simply gone, with no signal to mark the moment. The second was the harder question, and it would not be settled. It concerned her stability, the question of whether she floated as steadily as she should. Here, we have to be careful, because this is exactly the point on which the record refuses to close. A ship's stability is, in plain terms, her eagerness to come back upright when something pushes her over. A wave, a gust, a shift of cargo. A stable ship rolls quickly and returns smartly. A ship that is stiff rolls hard and snaps back. A ship that is tender or top-heavy rolls slowly, leans far, and comes back reluctantly. Load too much weight high in a ship, and you make her tender. Push it far enough, and in the wrong sea she may not come back at all. Several people who sailed on the Waratah described a slow, deep, hanging roll. Claude Sawyer was the most emphatic, but he was not alone. Other witnesses spoke of her lying over and being slow to recover. Some crew and officers, by contrast, found nothing wrong with her, and the ship had crossed 2 oceans without capsizing. Accounts genuinely differed, and the men making them were describing the same ship. The builders and the owners maintained that the Waratah was properly designed and properly loaded, that her stability was adequate, and that she met the standards of her day. There was no requirement then to test a ship's stability by the formal calculations that later became routine, and the precise figures for how she was loaded on her last voyage did not survive her. The inquiry could weigh the impressions of witnesses against the assurances of her makers. It could not put a number on the truth. So, hold both halves. A ship that some experienced people found unsteady, and a builder owner who insisted on the evidence they had that she was sound. The record contains both and closes neither. She left Australia in the middle of that southern winter and worked her way west across the Indian Ocean toward the Cape. Aboard were 211 souls, passengers and crew together. Whole families were traveling, parents and children, some returning to Britain, some emigrating the other way, some simply going home. In command was Captain Joshua Ilbery, the line's senior master, a man of long experience who had spent his working life on this ocean. The record keeps his name and his face. A portrait of him survives, an old sailor with a white beard, signed in his own hand. She called at Durban on the 25th of July. There, she took on coal and cargo for the run round to Cape Town, a heavy general lading in the ordinary way of a homeward-bound ship. It was at Durban that Claude Sawyer left her. On the afternoon of the 26th, the Waratah put out from Durban southbound down the coast for Cape Town, some 800 miles by sea. It was, on paper, the short and familiar leg, a coastal run she and 100 ships like her had made without a thought. The coast she was steaming down is one of the harder pieces of water in the world. Sailors call this stretch the Wild Coast, the Transkei shore, the old Ponderland, running southwest toward the Cape. The Agulhas current pours down it fast and warm, close inshore, and when a winter gale blows up hard against that current from the southwest, the sea can rise into steep, deep, breaking walls of water with troughs behind them. Ships have been damaged and lost there in weather that a deep ocean vessel would ride out. It is a coast that has always asked a great deal of a ship's seaworthiness. Into that coast, in the last week of July, the Waratah steamed south. The event, so far as the record can fix it, is short and can be told in order. In the early hours of the 27th of July, the Waratah overtook another vessel on the same coast, the cargo steamer Clan MacIntyre of the Clan line, southbound like herself and considerably slower. The two ships came within signalling distance off the Transkei coast in the region of the Bashi River mouth. They exchanged signals. The Waratah identified herself. She reported that she was bound for Cape Town. Someone aboard the Clan MacIntyre later recalled a friendly exchange of pleasantries between the two ships as the faster liner drew ahead, an ordinary courtesy of the sea. Then the Waratah, making perhaps 13 knots to the freighter's 9 or 10, pulled steadily ahead and drew away to the southwest, and by the middle of the morning she was hull down and then gone over the horizon. That was the last confirmed sighting of the Waratah by any vessel whose account could be trusted. A large, well-lit liner, in good order, signaling normally, drawing ahead of a slower ship in the ordinary business of a coastal passage. Behind her, the weather was turning. Through that day, the wind rose hard out of the southwest against the Agulhas current, and by night it was blowing a heavy gale on that coast, remembered afterward as one of the worst storms in years along the wild coast. The Clan MacIntyre, the slower ship she had left astern, ran into that same gale and had a hard time of it, but she was built low and heavy for cargo, and she came through and she made her port. Somewhere ahead of the Clan MacIntyre, in that same rising sea, the Waratah went out of the world. At first, no one was alarmed. She carried no wireless. Silence was expected of her. It was only when she failed to arrive at Cape Town and the days ran on that the silence began to mean something. The search began within a week and did not really stop for 100 years. The Blue Anchor Line chartered a vessel to sweep the coast. The Royal Navy sent ships. For months, warships and merchant vessels quartered the sea between Durban and the Cape, looking for wreckage, for boats, for any sign. Reports came in of bodies seen in the water off the coast in the weeks that followed, and of objects that might have been debris. None of it could ever be recovered and confirmed as the Waratahs. Nothing was landed and identified. Nothing tied a single body or a single spar, certainly to her. There were false hopes. A story went round that she had been disabled and was drifting, that she might yet be found afloat and towed in. A search was mounted on the strength of it. It came to nothing. She was not adrift. She was not anywhere that anyone could find. And then the modern searches began and ran for decades. For much of his life, a South African diver and researcher named Emlyn Brown made the finding of the Waratah his work. He searched the seabed off the wild coast across many years and many expeditions. In the late 1990s, a wreck was located that seemed for a while to be her. The announcement was made that the Waratah had at last been found. But when the site was examined properly, it proved to be a different ship altogether. A transport sunk in the Second World War, decades after the Waratah was lost. It was not her. In time, the man who had spent his life looking accepted that the wreck he had hoped for was not the one he had found, and the search went on without him. Other expeditions with better sonar have swept that coast since. They have found wrecks. They have not found the Waratah. The Board of Trade held its inquiry in London in 1910 and 1911 after hope was gone. It heard the witnesses. It heard Claude Sawyer describe the role that had put him ashore at Durban. It heard other passengers and crew from earlier legs of her voyages. It heard the builders and the owners defend her design and her loading. It weighed the evidence of a violent gale on a dangerous coast against the unresolved questions about how she carried her weight. And in the end, the inquiry did the honest thing. It did not invent a cause to satisfy the public. It found that the Waratah was lost, that in all probability she had foundered in the gale off the South African coast, and that she had capsized in circumstances that could not be determined from the evidence available. On the central question, whether a fault in her stability had helped to sink her, it returned, in effect, an open verdict. The stability of the ship, it concluded, could not be judged with the information that survived her. The cause was not proven. That is where the official record still stands, lost in the gale. Stability questions unresolved. No wreck, no survivors, no confirmed remains. A finding that refuses to pretend to more certainty than the sea allowed. It is worth saying plainly what that open verdict means, because it is the whole point of this story. It does not mean the ship was cleared, and it does not mean she was condemned. It means that the people whose duty it was to find the truth looked at everything there was and told the world honestly that they could not be sure. That, too, is a finding. Sometimes it is the only honest one there is. 211 people sailed from Durban on the Waratah and did not arrive. Captain Joshua Ilbery, who had spent his life on that ocean, went down with his ship. Families traveling home together were lost together. Emigrants, crew, children, the whole small population of a floating town, all of them gone in a single night on a coast that has always been hard on ships, in a storm that a slower vessel astern of her survived. At Lloyd's, in London, the loss was posted in the ordinary way, and her name was struck from the list of the living. 211 names for a ship that was never found. She lies somewhere between two ports, 800 miles of sea room from Durban to the Cape, and in all of it not one certain mark of where she went down. The searchers have found other men's wrecks looking for hers. Perhaps one day the right sonar will pass over the right patch of seabed, and the long, open verdict will close at last. Perhaps it will not. The sea does not owe us an answer. For now, the Waratah keeps her position to herself. The last honest thing the record can say of her is the smallest and the largest. She was there, off the wild coast, on the morning of the 27th of July, 1909, and then she was not. If you want the same silence read a different way, look next at the Edmund Fitzgerald, lost with all hands on Lake Superior in 1975. She, too, went down in a great storm with no distress call and no survivors. But her wreck was found within days, and her final hours were traced almost minute by minute. Set the two side by side, and you see plainly what the Waratah's searchers have never had, a place on the chart to stand and grieve. That investigation is the companion to this one.